Hello and welcome back to Sean in the Shed. On the show today, we've got Jonnie Noakes, who's the Director of Teaching and Learning at Eton College. Welcome to the show, Jonnie.
Thank you, Sean. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
And traditionally, we always start out by describing to the audience where you were born, where you were educated, and how you started out in your career. So perhaps you can share that with the audience.
Yeah, sure. I'm a Londoner, essentially. I grew up in London, in North London. I was educated actually at Eton, where I still am. So it's a source, in fact, of some amusement to me that I'm still here in my late 50s, when I've been here most of my life. I was educated here and then at Cambridge. So I had, in fact, in many ways, a very traditional and very academic education. That's partly what my parents wanted. My mother was, in fact, an academic scholar, and I grew up in that kind of environment. And decided I would make my way in teaching. So after a couple of years in Italy, I came back to England and started teaching at Eton when I was 24. And for various reasons, to do with the fact that I love it here, basically, and I find it very stimulating, I stayed for 33 years. And so I can actually give you my life story very quickly, Sean, because it's been a lot of the same for the last 33 years. Although actually that's not quite true, because I should say one reason why I've stayed is the variety that I can get in this environment.
And most people will be familiar with Eton, but for those who perhaps aren't, could you just describe some of the history of the college?
Sure. It was founded in 1440 by a teenager, Henry VI. And he founded it because he was worried about giving a proper education to children who couldn't afford one. So ironically, given that we're now a byword for privilege, we were set up to help poor scholars, and our original students were children who couldn't afford an education. And we've always had a contingent of people here on a free education. There are now 90 students who pay nothing at all, and quite a few more who pay very little. So that's really essentially why we were set up. And over the centuries, Eton has adapted and adapted again. So actually, one of the most surprising things, I think, when people come to Eton is that they say it's not at all what they expect. We've got such a public image, and actually not a very good public image. Let's be honest here. In some ways, it's quite toxic, and the papers love to use us as a byword for people who are overprivileged and who act in entitled ways. We're very conscious of that public image. The real school is very, very different. Much more interesting, much more diverse, much more real, actually, than the public image might suggest. So, yeah, we've evolved and continually reinvented ourselves. And so here in 2020, I find myself running a Centre for Innovation at Eton. And this is partly set up because we want to make sure that we are at the cutting edge of education, not just traditional.
And a lot of the education actually happens outside of the school. So I guess that's quite good for social distancing, given the current climate. But perhaps you can describe a few stories around what education happens outside of the classroom.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we are unusual in the sense that we are a 7-day-a-week boarding school. So we have the children with us all the time. We're single sex, they're all boys, aged 13 to 18, and there are 1,300 of them. And what's more, all the adults who work here full time live here too. So that's 160 teachers and their families live here at the school. And there's about another 500 staff who live here. So we're actually a small community that's here day and night. And what that means is, the students could be in the classroom, say 4 hours a day, but they're awake for, another 12 hours a day. And they're learning all the time. So we have a huge range, and we're very lucky to be able to provide this, of extracurricular, co-curricular activities. So the standard of music, for instance, is phenomenally high. We have a lot of drama going on. As you'd expect in a boys' school, we have a lot of sport going on. But we got lots. There's all the standard things you'd expect. But we've got a lot of niche interests as well. And boys who have a particular interest can find a way to pursue it. So at any time when boys aren't in classes, and now would be such a time, classes are finished for the day, we've got 1,300 boys all pursuing their own individual interests. It's a very busy place.
And geographically, you're very close to Windsor Castle there. It's probably a stone's throw from the college. You've been at the college 33 years, so you must have educated a few famous people and perhaps some of the royal family. We don't have to go into too much detail, but do feel free to share any stories that would be appropriate.
Yeah, there's always a problem with sharing these stories, of course, Sean. But you're absolutely right. We've had a lot of well-known children come through the school. We've had people come through the school who became well-known later. And I find it amusing that I've been here so long that quite a few of the people I've taught are now quite well-known in politics, for instance. I never taught Boris. We were actually contemporaries at school. But I did in fact teach Prince William for a year, but I'm not going to say anything about it.
No, well, that's good, because I've had somebody else on, Sean in the Shed, who's also taught Prince William, and he was slightly more open. So it's good that you've shut that question down. Let's talk about the free places though, because Eton, yes, is quite an exclusive school. It's a public school, but you do give free places away to students annually. So talk us through that.
Yeah, we do. That's right. I've mentioned that we were set up for poor scholars, and we've tried to expand the number of people to whom we give means-tested bursaries, basically. So these might not be academic scholarships. They don't necessarily have to be the academic high flyers, but they are children, young people for whom we think an Eton education would be a real game changer and could really help them. And we think that they would do well here. So we currently pour about £9 million a year into this. These places still have to be paid for to make the school run, and we're able to take that money out of our foundation income. So it's a huge commitment by the school, and it also means, of course, that we have to dedicate a lot of time to reaching these children, finding them, encouraging them to apply if they don't think that Eton's the kind of place that they would even consider. And then choosing them, making sure we get the right people, and making sure that they're happy once they're here. And we also, of course, need to make sure that they're happy once they've left. It's not enough just to invite them in and give them the education that we're giving. We need also to make sure that they're ready for what comes afterwards. So we give it a lot of time and attention.
There'll be plenty of parents listening to the show who have heard of Eton, but they might not necessarily have heard of EtonX, which is your online platform, part of college giving back. Could you describe what the purpose of EtonX is and the type of learning resources that students can find on that platform?
Yeah, EtonX was set up a few years ago. Originally, it was set up actually to sell courses that contained Eton material and were directed by Eton teachers to sell them overseas, particularly in the Asian market. Actually, we've decided to change direction on it because, especially during COVID, when it became clear that a lot of children, especially state-educated children, were not able to access much material while they were staying at home and while schools were closed, we decided to make a lot of the material that's on EtonX available for free to state schools. And some 200,000 children at state schools are now taking the EtonX courses. They're largely focused on life skills at the moment, so they're not courses in English and maths, for instance, on the academic subjects. They're courses in things like public speaking or resilience or how to write your CV or how to apply for university. That's a course we're working on at the moment. So these are life skills which we think all young people need to know. And yes, you're right, they're available on this EtonX platform. It's essentially a bit like the Khan Academy, but it's an interactive platform as well, and children can be taken through it by their own teachers. There's also the possibility to be tutored online or to be self-taught, whichever option you want to take.
And before we move on to other questions, it'd be good just to talk about the values that you uphold at Eton and the character of the school.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because, as I've already mentioned, they're not the values that people tend to associate with Eton. I mean, if I tell you that we aim for academic excellence, then you'll probably say, yeah, of course, and we do. That is a part of what we're here for. But I would say one of the key things we aim to do is to help each boy discover what he's good at and to discover what he loves, so that by the time he leaves, he will not only have some idea about what he wants to do with his life, but he will have actually done something. He would have gone quite a long way down the path of developing those skills. So one of the fundamental values is aspiration. And this is a really interesting one because we do quite a lot of work with state schools. For instance, we are one of the sponsors of the London Academy of Excellence in Newham, in East London. And one of the questions they put to us when we set them up was, how can we give these children aspiration? How can we give them a sense that they can aspire to do anything in their lives, because they're able children. It's a selective school, and the answer is not a straightforward one. You need really to encourage people to open their horizons and to see what is genuinely possible. And we're very lucky that the children who come to us get that from their home environment anyway. And if they haven't entirely got it from their home environment, they get it from each other. you've already mentioned that there are various famous old Etonians around. The fact that the boys here know that old boys from this school go on and do amazing things, and many of the less famous ones are doing the most amazing things. They're the ones who are less in the public profile, but are nevertheless pursuing their interests. The fact that that happens just means that these boys have a sense all the time they're here that anything really is possible and they can make a success of their lives. But that's not the same as saying that they feel entitled, because actually the other thing that we do with them is we work them really, really hard. So I don't think you'll find a single boy here who thinks that success is his due. You'll find a lot of boys here who think that they're going to be successful, but they know they're going to work for it, which is a very different attitude.
And that's a really good ethic to have. If you've just joined us, you're watching Sean in the Shed. And on the show today, we've got Jonnie Noakes, who's the Director of Teaching and Learning at Eton College. And so if you've got friends, family, contacts and others that might be interested in this video, do tag them in the comment stream. And you can hashtag share Sean in the Shed on social media. I am looking for future guests to the show. So if you're interested, do direct message me here on LinkedIn. But the question that myself and Jonnie would like to ask you, the audience today, is what do children need to know to flourish personally and professionally? If you've got questions, answers or opinion on that, do fill in the comment stream. But let's fire that question back to Jonnie now. What do children need to know to flourish personally and professionally? Because there's the quality of life, there's getting a job that pays, but there's also that thing of contentment, isn't there, and being happy in your own skin as a person. And so what's your opinion on this, and do you have any answers for this rather challenging question, I guess?
Well, it is a challenging question, and it is, I think, the central question for schools, because you may be aware, your audience may be aware, that the statistics for mental health problems among children and young people up to university age and beyond are really quite frightening, and they're getting worse, unfortunately. So yeah, the schools need to address this question, and they do, of course, because quite often the schools are the front line for children's pastoral care. Yeah, we do have answers to these questions. In fact, we know more now about what makes people happy and what makes people flourish than we've known for a long time. And I'm not for a moment denying the wisdom of the ages. You go out to classical times, you'll find that they had good ideas in this area. But we have a lot of research evidence now. That's the difference. And really, the last 3 decades have given us a huge amount of evidence for what leads or what correlates with human happiness and what drives it. So, for instance, good social connections, having good quality connections with other people. I'm not just talking about with your friends here. It could be with people, in the case of the school children, it could be with the adults in their community. It could be with their grandparents, for that matter. It could also be with younger siblings. It's the quality of the connections you have with other people. That is the single biggest predictor of people's happiness and well-being. So then, of course, the question arises, how much do we teach children about how to have successful relationships? So that's a major point of focus. Another driver of happiness is actually a really simple one, and that is gratitude. And this is true across all cultures. And you can teach people to be grateful. And it's not that sort of slightly irritating, you should be glad and grateful for what you've got. It's not that at all. It's simply acknowledging the extent to which all of us depend on each other for our lives. And just to get through the day, we depend on each other. And just to be aware of the extent to which we are part of this incredible, complex network of human beings, and being grateful for the way in which we're supported by others, that realization alone makes your well-being soar. That's a really interesting research finding, I think. There are other more predictable things. You need to sleep well. How many teenagers obey that one? Not many. You need to eat well. Again, a problem particularly among teenagers who seem to prefer sweets and pizza. So those two things are important. But then there are other things you can teach. You can teach people how to find meaning and what things do give them meaning. You can teach them how to be optimistic. You can teach them how to be resilient. You can teach them how to cope with failure and how to have what we call an open mindset. These are all very simple, teachable attitudes. And all of them are fantastic drivers of well-being. So rather than going on and on, the answer is we know quite a lot about what drives well-being. We know more than we did even 10 or 15 years ago, actually.
And does money make you happy, or is it about giving back? Because you've got these billionaires in America, but they're all pledging to give their money back. Is it actually more satisfying to give away the money than to earn it and to earn that success and that stature in the first place?
Well, I guess both give satisfaction, don't they? I mean, the short answer to does money make you happy is a certain amount of money enables happiness, because a lack of money is clearly a driver of the opposite. No one needs to be told that what money worries, or still worse, poverty, are huge causes of mental illness and problems. So that's stating the obvious. What's really interesting though, and this again is a research finding, is that people get happier and happier the more money they have, up to a certain amount, and beyond that, the more money they have makes no difference. And that threshold is really surprisingly low. Basically, if you have enough money to be secure, so you've got a roof over your head and you're not worried about where your meals are coming from, and you can perhaps plan a holiday for 6 months' time, that is a good position to be in. You don't need hundreds of thousands of pounds in the bank. You certainly don't need millions. And it's also true, I think most people know this, that many people who have an enormous amount of money have their worldview very badly skewed by that. It can lead to a lot of unhappiness. Money is not the key driver of happiness. We know that.
And what else can we do to make people happy? Because if I smile at a person long enough, they smile back. There's other tips and tricks, aren't there? Is it about opening doors for people? Is it when you're driving, letting somebody in? What else can we do, Jonnie?
Well, I mean, I think linked to the idea that the way we connect with other people is what matters. Empathy, which is a much used word, is crucial. It's not just about good manners, although good manners do matter. Good manners, after all, are what makes our daily lives more pleasant. But beyond that, an ability to genuinely see things from other people's point of view, an ability to care about other people is absolutely fundamental. Most of us have people in our lives for whom we care a lot, and then lots and lots of other people for whom we don't care very much, probably because we don't know much about them. To expand one's circle of empathy and actually care more about a wider group of people actually is a source of well-being, even though it brings, of course, with it a certain amount of anxiety, because you end up caring about their problems as much as anything else. So yeah, an ability to care, I would say, is fundamental also to human happiness.
And this sort of kindness, is it about giving with no expectation of something in return? Often people will give somebody something but expect that reciprocation. But is it actually about being selfless and being almost charitable, for want of a better word?
Yeah, I think it is, Sean. I mean, the trouble with the view that you give someone something for a reason is that it's a transactional view of life. And if in fact you view human relationships in a transactional way, the chances are you're going to have pretty unfulfilling relationships. You might negotiate the things you want out of life, but there's no real generosity in that. There's no love in transactional relationships. It's all about receiving what you want. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right. When you give something because it's yours to give, I don't mean it necessarily in money, but it could be that. But when you give, for instance, of your knowledge, when you give of your wisdom, when you give of your time, when you give of your care, because you have those things to give, then you have another kind of richness, and you enjoy that sense of being rich enough to give in time, to give in wisdom, to give in knowledge. And there's great joy in that. As any parent knows who's passed things on to their children, there can be great joy in that kind of giving, much more satisfying than expecting something in return.
And in this recessionary environment, is it now harder to give and harder to be charitable, or is it actually quite a lot easier because there are elderly people trying to shelter, and people need to have that camaraderie and communities need to come together? Do you think that people are, during these tough times, are becoming more charitable, or are we all becoming quite insular and looking after ourselves, staying in our shed, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, those are two different responses to the present climate. I'm sure that both of them are very much in evidence. I've been really struck by the extent to which people are becoming more aware of the needs of those around them. But of course, it would be idealistic to assume that that's the stance that everyone has taken. I think it's become very clear that at a time like this, community matters. Even if it becomes harder to be out in the community and to be physically with other people, community matters, and making sure that those links that support people in communities really are strong, that also matters. So yeah, one of the things I think has come out of this terrible crisis is a reevaluation of the importance of what people can do for each other and how they can help each other.
There'll be people listening to the show. Some will be doing quite well in this economy because perhaps their industry sector hasn't been affected. Others will be struggling. For those people that are struggling and are a bit uptight and stressed, are there some practical tips around how to have a better day? Because is it how you get out of bed in the morning? Is it about your attitude? Is it your mindset? Is it about going for a run? What can you do to just feel better so that you're setting yourself up for success, even though it might be a tough time and maybe the cards are stacked against you?
Well, there are things you can do. I mean, they are pretty well known. None of these is a stunning new insight. However difficult things are, if you can make sure that you are getting good exercise and good sleep, then that is an absolute foundation for well-being. After that, a lot of it is about attitude. And this sounds very easy to say. I happen to be working in a job where my job isn't threatened. So perhaps it sounds like I'm rather complacent if I say it's all about attitude when people are really up against big difficulties. But, if you accept that what is, and you then look to what you can do about it, rather than complaining about what is, and rather than finding fault with other people, if you just say, look, this is what is going on, what can I do? What is it in my power to do here? That's psychologically a much firmer place to come from. One thing's for sure, finding fault with the world, finding fault with other people, finding fault, with the Chinese because the virus seems to come from there, or finding fault with your employer because your employer's furloughed you, none of this is going to help. It all takes the power out of your hands and makes you into a victim, which is not a happy place to be. So to take the power back into your hands and say, okay, what can I do to make my life better? That's a really strong place to come from.
How does education need to change to this new world and this new normal? Because there's obviously the Victorian era where everybody's getting the same sort of education. We're seeing greater personalization. You'll have that within EtonX. Yeah. So we need to be setting kids up for success, obviously with creativity, collaboration, critical thinking skills. But what else should we be doing when it comes to education to improve outcomes, living standards, and well-being?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on some of the things there. I think one of the things we need to do, but unfortunately COVID is making this harder, is to take some of the academic pressure off children. But that's very difficult at a time when children have missed quite a lot of education and schools are very keen to make up that lost ground. There's actually there's a surge of opinion among educators at grassroots level that we need to be rethinking how we assess children, and especially how we assess them at 16. Now that most children stay on in education past 16, almost all do. We don't really need these examinations at 16, and they're enormous stressors for children. So that's one thing that we're looking at. I'm actually part of a group called Rethinking Assessment who are looking at that at the moment. And that includes some quite senior figures in education. So that's one area. I think also paying far more attention to what really makes people happy and teaching children that. That's a theme I've been pursuing during this conversation. That's an area I think of real interest. I think also, we need to consider what education is for. We're not just a doorway to the next stage of people's lives. If you think that that's what we're about, then getting results is the only thing that matters. Instead, we are preparing young people for happy lives. We're preparing young people to thrive, which is why I asked the question that I did ask. What do we need to teach young people in order to make sure that they do thrive professionally and personally? And I've got a whole range of ideas of my own, many of which are evidence-based, but I'm really interested to know what your audience might think matters.
No. And so if you've got thoughts, opinion on any matters, do fill in the comment stream, and I'm sure Jonnie will come back to you. So that's interesting. As before your advice for getting through the crisis, what's your view of lockdown and the sort of pain that people are enduring? Because on the one hand, life has become more simple. Maybe families are closer in some ways, but there's a lot of negativity. And if you were to watch the news, you could get quite depressed. I mean, I myself have actually turned off the news, but you've still got the smartphone news alerts coming through. So just your general thoughts on the current crisis. Hopefully the vaccine's around the corner, but any thoughts that you've got, Jonnie, really around this, what we can learn from this, I guess?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because without a doubt, the crisis has caused intense problems for a lot of people, and I wouldn't for a second underestimate those. I'm not just talking about people who are ill. I'm talking, of course, about people who've had to isolate and are very cut off. Therefore, that's very tough, especially for older people. I'm talking about people who've lost their jobs. That's a really, really tough one. And the insecurity, I think, that this moment has brought about is deeply worrying. I think a lot of people feel anxious. They just don't quite know what is going on. Life isn't as it used to be, and it's not clear it's ever going to go back to normal. It's not clear what it's going to go back to, and that causes enormous anxiety. So those are all very real problems. I suppose the other way of looking at it, though, is that in a moment like this of crisis, which is after all a crossroads, that's what a crisis is, there's an opportunity to think again and take a different direction. And I'm very struck by the number of people who are saying, actually, we don't want to go back to normal because normal wasn't good. normal needed changing in the first place. What we need is a new normal and a better normal than the one we had before. Now that's a lovely idea. It's going to take time to work towards a new normal, but I think that this is a moment when we can begin to do that, and that applies to education as much as to other areas, to think again about what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we can do it better. So there is an opportunity here as well. But I don't underestimate it. I've been very lucky because I have a family, so social isolation actually means being with my family. And we spent most of the summer here actually at Eton, where we've got a garden. So we swam in the Thames, and it was actually really lovely. I know it's very different for people who live on their own. But I was cut off from my adult children for a while when they couldn't visit, and I found that hard. So, I do understand what it's like when you can't have the daily interactions with people that you're used to.
Just finishing off the show now, Jonnie, just take your top tips for getting through this crisis. There'll be plenty of managers, business leaders and owners listening to the show thinking, I've got some tough decisions to make. There may well be head teachers and teachers listening as well as parents. So what are your tips for getting through this next 3 to 6 months, I guess?
Yeah, well, I guess it's partly about priorities, isn't it? And one of the things that I like about a moment when you have to pause is it gives you a chance to rethink again about your priorities. I think a lot of people are used to rushing from one thing they have to do to another. And a moment when you can think to yourself, actually, is this how I want to live? And are these really my priorities? Can in itself be valuable? So top tips, I've already mentioned that the biggest driver for people's happiness is their social connections. It's been difficult during this crisis to maintain social connections, but it's not impossible, even if you can't see people in person. So giving them real time and focus, give your connections time and focus, the people you love. Make sure that you're really connecting with them on a daily basis if necessary. That's top tip number one, because I do know that in busy people's lives, those connections can get squeezed out. Top tip number two is a really simple one, which is do something every day that brings you joy. Don't just do the stuff you have to do. We all do stuff we have to do, but just find at least one thing every day that genuinely brings you joy. And for different people, that'll be a very different thing. So know what brings you joy is the second one. And the third one, which is a much bigger thing, but is actually related to reconsidering your own life. And that is do what gives your life meaning. And earning a living isn't enough of a meaning. There's a lot of things we can do because there are good reasons, but that's different from doing something because it has meaning for us. And it doesn't matter whether what has meaning for you is different from what has meaning for other people. What matters is it has meaning for you. That's really, I would say, the most important thing of all. These are probably really obvious things, but if I tell you that I didn't discover them until I was probably in my 30s or even 40s, I'm keen to teach these things to teenagers so they know them when they start out.
I definitely agree with you on the point of, what's your purpose? That's quite a deep question, and it can take some time to discover that. But once you know what your purpose is, your mission and vision of your life, fast forwarded into the future, becomes a lot clearer, and you do become happier. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Jonnie. If people want to connect with you, you're clearly on LinkedIn. Are there other methods? What's the best approach?
Yeah, through LinkedIn is great, but actually, to tell you the truth, I prefer email because I check it very regularly. And my email address is on my LinkedIn account, but I'm also happy to tell you now it's j.noakes@etoncollege.org.uk. So do contact me directly. And if I don't reply immediately, it's just because I'm trying to answer my emails alongside finding joy in my life and finding meaning.
No, that's really good. Very much appreciated. Have you got a busy evening ahead, Jonnie? What are you up to?
I am. I've got a little 8-year-old girl who I'm going to go back and give her supper to, and then I'm on a phone call with my son who's getting married in a month's time. Of course, it's a much smaller marriage than they originally planned, but he's very excited about that. And then I look forward to spending an evening just relaxing with my wife.
Thank you so much, Jonnie, for coming on the show. Thank you to you, the audience, for joining in the conversation and for watching Sean in the Shed. We'll be back on tomorrow. So thanks for watching and have a great evening now, everybody. Bye for now.